Welcome, everyone. Great to be here during this exciting time. I'm Glen Kosaka. I'm head of product security for SUSE, coming to SUSE through the NeuVector acquisition. All right, so I'm going to dive into the 5.0 release and all the details. I realize that some of you may be new to NeuVector, so I'm going to focus on the new 5.0 features, but I'll try to put it into context of the existing features for NeuVector, for those of you who are new to NeuVector. NeuVector is a full lifecycle container security platform. There are two major aspects of NeuVector. Pipeline, sometimes we call it pipeline security. Sometimes the kind of the buzzword today is supply chain security. So it's really vulnerability and compliance management all the way from the beginning of your pipeline to the runtime. So we're able to scan or trigger scanning of images in the build pipeline through tools like Jenkins or CircleCI or Azure DevOps, and reject builds. So developers have to remediate those so that vulnerabilities don't get into the pipeline. We're then able to scan registries. That could be in a staging or production environment, and then all the way in production, runtime scanning, PCI compliance, CIS benchmarks, a whole bunch of auditing things that we can do. So with that, new in 5.0 in this area, first of all, this is our first open source version of the product, so very excited about that. Rancher integration is one of the key things in this release, and support for not just RKE, RKE2, K3S, but also SUSE Linux, being able to scan SUSE Linux for vulnerabilities, subscribing to the OVAL feed from SUSE's Linux security team. So if we focus on the Rancher integration part of it, as many of you know, this is Rancher Manager running on GKE and NeuVector running on GKE. So although NeuVector supports and can be deployed by Rancher on all of the Rancher RKE versions, K3S, NeuVector can be deployed natively on Kubernetes, also on GKE, EKS, AKS, all the public cloud Kubernetes services. So if we look at what's been deployed here, we can see primarily deployments of replica sets for the controller, control plane for NeuVector, the enforcer as a daemon set, and then the manager, which is the console that we're going to take a look at. And the scanner is actually a scalable scanner pod that can scale up to as many that you need for your deployment. This 265 is going to show up as what's called a feature chart. It's really a core Rancher chart. And once you configure a few values in here, mainly, make sure you got the right container runtime set if you're running on Containerd, Cryo. K3S has a special setting if you're using K3S. That's a key thing to set. So make sure that is all configured properly and then deploy. And you will see a NeuVector menu item show up here on the left side. And that will lead you to a button. When you push that button, this is the integration feature where you can go directly to the NeuVector UI through Rancher, single sign-on, logging in without having to re-log in. Essentially, you're using your Rancher login credentials to get to NeuVector. And in NeuVector, of course, you can see a summary of all the security issues. If you have multiple clusters that you're managing through this particular NeuVector deployment, you can see your multiple clusters here as well. So NeuVector has multi-cluster management where you can manage multiple clusters from a single UI. Now, related to that scanning capability, if you had turned on under assets registry scanning, you would be able to see scan results. So we talked about being able to scan SLE / deployments, and it would look something like this, where there'd be a list of vulnerabilities we've detected, at the specific layer of the image and the run command or the make command for it. Also, any image-related CIS benchmarks on that image, as well as the module or package list in that image with a summary of vulnerabilities, which ones, like this one has 5 fixable vulnerabilities, but there's a total of 15. So it looks like most of the critical ones are fixable. So that's an example of the pipeline scanning and Rancher integration in 5.0. Okay, so the next major part of NeuVector is runtime security. And in runtime security, that includes the key gateway of admission controls, governing what can be deployed into the production environment, and the critical container firewall. This is a core capability of NeuVector. It's a differentiation. The only product out there that has a true layer 7 container firewall that's going to inspect all pod-to-pod traffic and all ingress and egress traffic out of the cluster, and can block connections on a connection by connection basis. In addition to that, we're going to monitor each workload, each container, and monitor the process and file activity within that container, and can block unauthorized processes. So there are some major new features in these two areas that come with 5.0. So the first is what we call zero drift process and file protection. And essentially what that is we are going to scan the image, and any process that starts that does not come from a parent process that we detect in that image is going to be deemed as untrusted. So if you're in a monitor protect mode, we're going to alert or we're going to block that process. Same with file activity. Anything that's not part of the original files in the original image can be alerted or blocked. In the networking side, we've added WAF and API security. So this is web application firewall, ability to inspect incoming connections, such as headers or URLs for OWASP top 10 attacks, such as SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, and the new Log4j exploit attempt. This can also be used for external connections to enforce API security. So if we look at the NeuVector console and we go into policy under groups, groups is a key area of NeuVector. We're going to pick a pod to look at. So this anchor symbol is an indication that zero drift mode is on for this pod. The reason this is so important is because administrators, security teams don't need to actually declare the allowed processes, or don't need to send NeuVector through a learning process and evaluate that to determine what the allowed processes are. They can just keep zero drift on, and they will have automated process and file protections without even lifting a finger. All right, so that's zero drift. Okay, and so the other great feature is when I talked about WAF. And so you could see here, this is a regular expression-based match of primarily incoming connections that you would apply to the pods that are exposing web applications. But basically, we're looking at incoming connections for a number of different types of attacks or exploits. I mentioned SQL injection, cross-site scripting. You could see here we've also added Log4Shell as well as Spring4Shell. So as we go forward and we get these critical vulnerabilities, if we can detect them through inspecting of in this case, it's the body, but you can set up a rule to look at the entire body, the entire packet, the URL, or the header, if that's where you expect the exploit to take place. So with WAF, not only can you protect incoming connections, you can also use this for what we call API security for outbound connections as well. So really, it's like a WAF on steroids. So if you apply these detections to outbound connections, then one example in terms of API security would be to only allow HTTPS gets from a WAF API, from an external API service. but don't allow post as an example. So you can do all of the controls on outbound connections as you can on inbound. So once you have set up your sensors, whether it's a WAF sensor or a DLP sensor, you would then go into the appropriate group where you would want to apply that sensor. So if I expect incoming connections into my Nginx pod and I want to apply WAF rules to it, then I would then go in here and I would add those rules to it. All right, so that's some cool, powerful new features that really leverage the deep packet inspection engine. Also new in 5.0, so NeuVector supports a declarative zero trust. You will hear the word zero trust from us a lot. Zero trust based security strategy. By that, we mean you can declare the allowed behavior of your workload and then push that allowed behavior into any of your clusters before your application is deployed. And anything else that happens in that workload, network connections, process, or file activity, is going to be alerted or blocked. So to support that, we have always supported CRDs to declare network process and file activity in NeuVector. And in 5.0, we're adding the ability to create your admission control rules through CRD, DLP and WAF rules that we just looked at. You can also create those or import those through CRD and update them through CRD. This is a really cool feature, service group mode automation. This is where NeuVector will automatically move your workload from discover mode to monitor mode and from monitor mode to protect mode based on some criteria and a time frame. One of the themes for this 5.0 release is automation, automated deployment through Rancher, RBACs, automated WAF, CRD rules, automated service group automation. Zero drift is an automation feature as well. So a lot of great automation features in 5.0. Okay, I think I've covered some of the major stuff. That's all we have for today. Thanks, everyone.